Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Reading in the Dark. Byron here. I am here drinking a really amazing glass of wine. It's a strange way to start this video about books, but so I had that Halloween party on like October 27th or something, and I had a few people brought me bottles of wine, and we opened most of them at the party, but I've been saving one from a couple of my friends that is a bottle of red wine, and I just opened it because it's like Christmas time. It is so good. This is just like a red blend, and it's called Freak Show. Delicious. I recommend it. Anyway, welcome to this video. This is going to be one of, well, two videos that are like sort of wrapping up the year. This is going to be my top 10 reads of 2018 video. Philip, it's incredible. Start filming, dog. And this is Pete. It's a little disturbing looking. You can see through him. Yeah. Anyway, okay, Philip, you entertain yourself. So anyway, that's my dog interrupting yet again. So I'm going to do my top 10 reads of 2018 while I drink this delicious wine. These are in an order, I guess, but I went back and forth so many times in terms of putting these things in order that take the order with a grain of salt. So, okay, starting from number 10, a novella called All Systems Red by Martha Wells. You've probably heard of this before. This is a science fiction novella about an AI inside this sort of security robot that is tasked with defending these human beings on this outpost on this planet from some unknown danger. It calls himself or itself Murderbot, and spends all of its time sort of watching old TV shows that it has saved in its memory bank. It doesn't want to be involved with like interacting with people, and they keep trying to like break through and interact with the Murderbot, and Murderbot is just like sort of like has social anxiety kind of thing. It doesn't know how to talk to people because its job is to just stay in the corner and like shoot the bad guys. It's a really brilliant book. It's a commentary on introverted people, and it's told through that lens, and it's just really funny, and it has a beautiful, beautiful ending. Oh, I loved the ending. I loved the ending, and I'm not going to say anymore. Number 9 was a book that a lot of people have very tepid reactions to. This is a book called Ilsa by Madeleine. This book, I guess, was a very early book of hers that was originally published way back in the day. I don't remember the date, but I'll put it on the screen. And then she moved on, and then she became famous for Wrinkle in Time, and she just sort of like went off in that direction and wasn't particularly proud of this backlist title of hers, and it was never republished. So recently they republished it. Ostensibly, it's the story of Ilsa. It's the story of this firebrand, this really unique young woman who loses her sight when she's young and sort of perseveres. But it's told from the perspective of Henry, and basically he spends his entire life from the time that they're both little kids just enraptured and obsessed with and really in love with Ilsa. All he can think about is her, and a lot of what he writes about is her. But the book is not about Ilsa. I have a different reading of this book. I don't think this is about her. I think this is the story of Henry. And a lot of people are like, there's a reason this was never republished. It's fine. I think if you go into reading this expecting something more like her other work, maybe that would be your reaction. But as like going in blind and never having read anything by this author before, I adored this book. I think this is the story of this man who doesn't think for himself, and he doesn't do for himself, and it takes him a very long time to come around to that realization. And so it's sort of brilliant in my opinion because told from his perspective, all he's ever really talking about and focusing on is her, but in the process, he's illuminating his own character to the reader, and you learn about him through him talking about her. And which is why the book is called Ilsa, because what else would it be called? It took me to a different time, it was set in a different time period, and I love there's a whole section where he talks about this troupe of traveling actors and this one really charismatic actor who plays Hamlet. And the depiction of this like old school troupe of traveling actors was really interesting to me. I was so, once again, thrilled by the ending. I thought it was perfect. The ending was beautiful. It happened exactly the way it needed to. I love this book. I will read it again. I really highly recommend it. And just don't go into it expecting the on-brand Madeleine because it's very different. The next book on my list is number 8 on the list, and that's Mildred Pierce by James M. Cain. So I read this for Booktubeathon. I gotta take a drink of wine for this. Woo! Oh my God, like, I don't want to be like a wine snob. This is like the most intense, like oakiest, driest, like bam, like glass of wine in the world. Anyway, so Mildred Pierce. This tells the story of a sort of a social climber, a woman who is unhappily married and has a daughter, and then she leaves her husband because he's like weak and lazy, and she just goes off and starts a business and is just like a world beater. But she also is very impulsive and makes decisions that are sometimes a little bit questionable. And it's just her getting along in the world and rising in business and taking care of her daughter, who is growing up to be this really manipulative and talented but scary person. It turns into kind of the battle between the mother and the daughter, and it's just the schism that forms between this mother and daughter and the mind games that happen, not in a we always pit women against each other because catfight type thing, but it's just a brilliant like the hurts of the past come back to just hurt us again and again and again, and mistakes made have consequences down the road. And it was so moving, and I laughed and I punched the air in like, yeah, moments, and then cried my eyes out. And I was a lot of these books on this list are books that I was surprised by, and I was surprised by Ilsa. I was very surprised by All Systems Red, and I was shocked by Mildred Pierce. I could not believe how much I ended up loving this book. I don't know what I was expecting, but I finished the book with I was like, what? I just recommend this book if you are at all interested in historical fiction. You got to read it. One of my favorites, obviously, because we're here discussing my favorites. Number 7 on my list is a science fiction book, and this is Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer. Yes, there are 2 other books in this trilogy, and they're fine, and they continue the mythos of the world that he creates in Annihilation, but Annihilation is one of those books where the viewpoint character, the narrator of the book, is going through something. They're in this fantastical world that where up is down and down is up. They're getting a little confused, maybe under the influence of something, in kind of a haze. They don't understand, they can't comprehend what they're experiencing. And so it's written in this style that puts you in the same frame of mind. You don't understand what's going on in the same way that the character doesn't understand what's going on. It just leaves you a little bit like you're floating above the ground. Reading this book made me feel like I was losing my perception of reality and events in just a delicious way. And I love when a book can do that. And it had action, and it had sci-fi, and it had, weird, crazy stuff and all that kind of surfacey fun things, but just on a deeper level in terms of how it's written. It's brilliant. I'm really glad that I have more sci-fi on this list than I thought I would. Number 6 on my list is The Other Side of Everything by Lauren Doyle Owens. This is a mystery. The book starts with a death where someone is murdered, and it's an old woman in this neighborhood that's been very well established for many years, and all of her neighbors have lived there for decades as well, and they're all octogenarians, and it starts to appear as though somebody is targeting and murdering the people that are in this group of older people in the neighborhood who call themselves the originals. And these are the people who are of that age group who have lived there since the neighborhood was built. And really, this book, it is an investigation sort of into her death, but it's not really about that. To me, it just felt like the murder and the investigation is sort of like a creepy, exciting entry point into a book that is really just a tapestry of the memories and lives lived and experiences of all of these older people in this neighborhood, and just the intricate web that has been woven over the years of the relationships between all of these people in this neighborhood. You just learn so much about their pasts and their lives, all of these different, very full lives. At the end of the day, it was so beautiful. This was an exciting book because it was a thriller and it was a mystery and there was a murder involved, but again, so much more than I expected. This was not just a mystery. As the weeks progressed after I read it, I continued to think about it, and it has ended up on my top 10. It's just great. I really loved it. The next book on my list, I stuck right in the middle of the list at number 5 because I wasn't sure where to put it. And that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is a book about a young woman who is feeling disillusioned with her life. It's feeling like a little bit, just like disconnected from her friends and her career and just like life in general. And so she decides to unplug, sort of, and to live in her apartment because she has a trust fund because her parents passed away and she has all this money. And so she can just live idly for a year and just basically stay asleep for a year. And she uses drugs that she kind of manipulates this horrible therapist to prescribe all these drugs, and she stays under the influence of all of these basically sedatives for a year. And it's just like trippy, and it's really funny because it's Ottessa Moshfegh, and this book went to a place at the end that I was not expecting, and I sobbed. I sobbed tears of just like life affirming, life is precious, life is beautiful, let's make the most of it feelings, and it was a good feeling. It sounds like it was a sad feeling. It wasn't. It was a good feeling. I loved it. It's funny. It's sad. It's unique. It's fascinating. It's great. And I will, from here on out, I will always read anything and everything that Ottessa Moshfegh writes. Number 4 is a book that I had never intended on putting on this list, but again, it just kept coming up. And that is my first book by George R.R. Martin, a book that is set 100 years before the Song of Ice and Fire series, and that is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, this is actually an anthology of 3 separate novellas that were written at very different times in Martin's career, and they tell the stories of a hedge knight named Sir Duncan the Tall, who goes by Dunk, and his squire, Egg, who is this little, young, skinny boy who's bald. It's sort of just like an everyman's portal into seeing what the world of Westeros was like 100 years before the beginning of A Game of Thrones. It was illustrated by, I think his name is Gary Gianni, and I loved the illustrations, and I enjoyed the world of Game of Thrones, and my starting point was watching the TV show, and with that being my only preparation for this, I really loved this book because it took me to this different land that I was somewhat familiar with, but which was drawn a little bit more intricately in the book than it is on the TV show, because it's a book. I just had a wonderful time reading this. You got little snippets here and there of things that were familiar, like there's a dragon's egg at one point, and there's a little bit of like, oh, that's so-and-so, and, intrigue. And it was just like engaging and a page turner and funny in some cases, and just great. Just great. I really enjoyed my first George R.R. Martin experience, which is why I'm going to go on and try to read through The Game of Ice and Fire this year. Oh, God. I just really, really loved it, and it has stuck with me, so that's number 4. My third favorite read of 2018 is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, I had heard of this. Like many people, I had it confused with The House on Haunted Hill at first. Totally different thing. That was a movie to begin with Vincent Price, which, by the way, that original movie is really good. Tangent, not related. So, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson is one of the 2 books that she's probably best known for. The other one is We Have Always Lived in the Castle. This tells the story of a naive and idealistic, young, innocent, guileless young woman. Her name is Eleanor, who is sort of asserting her independence and her individuality for the first time after her mother has finally passed away, whom she was caring for in her illness. And she takes the car that she shares with her sister against her sister's wishes and drives out to meet this scientist guy who is doing a study of this supposedly haunted house. All of the people he has invited have had some sort of paranormal experience in their past. And she has. And so she's considered to be like sort of susceptible. What follows is her experience at the house and the slow unraveling of like her mind. And there's hauntings and there's noises in the night. And so it's just great characters and great relationships and spooky vibes and atmosphere and just a really sweet internal life of this main character, Eleanor, that made it just such a memorable read and one that I will probably reread every Halloween. The book that I have in the number 2 spot on my top 10 reads of 2018 is a book that I just finished reading. So once again, this list is all about surprises. This book came out of nowhere and shocked me, literally, because when I opened up my Christmas box to get out my Christmas decorations this year, I have these magazines in there that I put in my coffee table because it has a glass top and then it has a drawer underneath so you can display things. And so every year, it's very silly. I don't know if I've ever even read them, but I have these like really pretty and expensive Martha Stewart Christmas magazines from a few years ago, and they go in the Christmas box along with all the other decorations, and then I put them in that drawer to look at because they're pretty. And along with those is also this little book called You Better Not Cry by Augustine Burroughs, and I always looked at this as like just decoration in my house. I don't know, I just got so used to seeing it laying around that I never thought about it as a book. When something just becomes decoration. When I was decorating this year, I thought, wait a minute, that's literally a book. I should like read it because it's Christmas. So I read it, and it's short, and it's really an anthology of little vignettes of his life. And 2 of them are from when he's a very young child, and he's confused about who Jesus is versus who Santa Claus is, and he makes a gingerbread house out of all the wrong ingredients. And then there are some stories that carry you further into his adulthood when he starts to struggle with drinking too much and being promiscuous and sleeping around when he lives in New York City. And then his relationships with men, and the heartbreak of losing a lover to AIDS. I was just emotionally leveled by this book. It is so much more than I expected. I didn't realize I was signing up for beautifully illuminated tour of these two relationships, and especially one in particular, the way he describes it and the way they look at each other and the way he articulates what his feelings were in those moments for this man just cut me right to my core, and it was so beautifully written. I don't get to read that many stories about gay characters written from the perspective of a gay character, and I need to read more of them. Because when I read this, I was touched on such a deep level. I cherished the time that I spent reading this man's story. It manages to be a book about life and loss and pain and love, but also is really about Christmas and what it has meant to him throughout his life and how his relationship with the holiday of Christmas has evolved over the years. It's hilariously funny and moving and just absolutely heart demolishing and then inspiring at the end. I mean, I tell you, I was laughing so hard in the first couple of chapters where he was talking about Santa and Jesus and all this stuff. I was laughing so hard, I had to put the book down and wipe tears away. I had tears streaming down my face, and I was laughing so hard my stomach hurt. Okay? And then in the later chapters, my heart went out to him, and just like, he went through this period where he was very negative and very sarcastic, and I kind of, I relate to that. It's so amazing. I don't know what I was expecting, but of everything I have read this year, You Better Not Cry by Augustin Burroughs, which I thought was just going to be an irreverent, funny, kind of dirty humor book about, sarcastic a look at the holidays, is the book that has restored in me most fully a love and a reverence for what the meaning of this season is and what the meaning of this holiday is and how precious life is and how important love is and how we need to spread it around. I absolutely loved this book. And I just read it. So I don't know. I don't have much distance between myself and the experience of having read it. But it was just so wonderful. It was so much more, I think, than the sum of its parts, and it was so much more than I expected. I just absolutely adored it. I gave it 5 stars, which was not something I expected to be doing. The final book on my list is probably not going to be a surprise to any of you. The book that has been sitting pretty solidly in my number 1 spot all year long is The Flicker of Old Dreams by Susan Henderson. This book tells the story of a young woman who lives with her alcoholic father in a small town in Montana called Petroleum. And this young woman is the embalmer at a funeral home. And many, many years ago, there was an accident at the grain elevator where a young boy was killed and his younger brother was not killed. But the town blames the younger brother for the accident. And because of the accident, the grain elevator is shut down and the train no longer stops at Petroleum. And so the town has kind of become depressed economically and becomes sort of like a ghost town, and it's slowly dying. And the young man whose older brother was the one who died comes back to town to be with his mother during her final days. And the narrator of this book starts to look at her place in the world and what her future is going to be. And along the way, we see an in-depth look of her relationship with her father. We experience a lot of her memories of growing up in the town. And we also get to see a very up-close look at her work and what she does in embalming people after they die. It was not gratuitous and it wasn't sensational or intentionally gross. It was just conversational. This woman, this is what she does for a living, and she discusses what she's doing. And yes, there are moments that are funny because she's having these very deep thoughts about life, and then she says something that to an outsider is kind of gross about what she's doing to the body that she's working on. But those sort of jarring moments of transition aren't jarring in her head, and that is what makes it work. This is literary fiction, and it's beautifully written. It's basically poetry. And there is one moment in particular at a funeral. There's a very small detail. A woman is saying goodbye to her husband at his funeral. That just is just the tiniest thing. And it just it just destroyed me. It was the most beautiful, astute little detail, this little moment, this thing that happened. This author, Susan Henderson, has obviously lived with this story for a long time and took her time to make it right. And that is the level of intricate detail and love that is just present in every page of this book. I'm trying to articulate exactly why this book means so much to me. It was one of the first books that I read this year that was straight up literary fiction. I heard about it on a interview with the author on Writers on Writing. The story of how this woman is sort of jarred awake by the return of this other young man, and stops and takes a look around her and sees where she is in her life and what she's doing, what she's not doing, and how it sort of wakes her up and forces her to think about what's next. Was meant a lot to me. And I read this book at a time in my life when that was very pertinent and very relevant to me personally. And it's interesting because it has an echo of a theme that I really enjoyed in Ilsa by Madeleine L'Engle, which I think I read right before I read this. They both sort of touched on that same idea in very different ways. And that became a theme of my reading this year. People who are stuck in traps and in cycles, who an inciting event takes place, which sort of jars them out of it and they move on with their lives. This book was enjoyable on multiple levels. I adored it. I've given a copy of it as a gift to one of my best friends, and I will give more copies, and I will tell everyone that will stop to listen to me about it. It's my #1 read of the year, and that is The Flicker of Old Dreams by Susan Henderson. So those were my top 10 reads of 2018. There were a few honorable mentions that I just didn't have time to include in this video. Reasons that I love those books are represented by the books that are in my top 10 in this list. So I hope that your year of reading was as enjoyable and broadening as mine was. I know that I learned a lot about myself and about myself as a reader this year, so I'm very grateful for the journey that my reading has taken. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you have any comments about the books that I am discussing in this video, please feel free to leave them below. And if you like this video, hit the like button. And if you loved this video and would like to see more content like this, it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe to my channel. And then you can hit that little bell icon so that you'll be notified when I post new videos. I will hopefully be posting twice a week from here on out. I've been doing pretty well with that. And I will see you all in the next video. And until the next time, I will be here in the dark with a lovely glass of wine reading. Bye, guys.